The things that I've gotten from ACA have been pretty remarkable. When I just look at my ability to have those open, honest dialogues with people, it's just amazing to me how much more authentic I'm able to be now and to be able to express my emotions. A lot of these things are still a struggle. You don't put in 46 years of dysfunction or 50 years of dysfunction, just training these patterns and turn it around overnight. It doesn't work like that, and I know my path to recovery is long from over, but I have made so much progress already. I feel like a different person when I look back at who I was, how small I had become and closed and fearful and angry to being someone who feels good about themselves, and sees his own value.
Hi, I'm Barb Nangle. I want to welcome you to my podcast, Fragmented to Whole, Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery, where I help people heal their emotional, psychological, and spiritual wounds and make deep, lasting changes in their lives. I'm the founder and CEO of Higher Power Coaching and Consulting. I'm a boundaries coach who specializes in helping women who are focused on what others are thinking and doing and neglect themselves in the process. And I have coached hundreds of people on how to build healthy boundaries using my exclusive Build framework. On this podcast, I share my experience, strength, and hope from recovery. I don't support or endorse any particular 12-step recovery fellowship, and I don't claim to speak for any particular 12-step fellowship. I also don't believe that 12-step recovery is the only way to recover. You might need additional help. I'm an avid beachcomber who collects sea glass, shells, wood, and stones. I am a formerly closeted fan of the Hallmark Channel, especially the Christmas movies. Hello, Christmas in July. I wear fingerless gloves from September to June because my hands are always cold, so I have about 15 pairs. And I get a huge kick out of counting how many days, weeks, and months there are until my birthday or Christmas at completely random times of the year. My hope is that you'll find my words concretely helpful in improving your life, whether you're in recovery or not. If you like what you've heard on this episode, please screenshot it and share it on your social media and tag me at Higher Power Coaching. This is episode 270, Becoming Willing to Ask for Help with guest Ken Dunn. I am very excited to have a conversation with Ken today. This is at least our third conversation that we've had, but the first one we've recorded for the podcast. He's a fellow in recovery. I know we met online, but I don't remember how. But I'm really excited to have people hear your story. And I love that you wanted to entitle this Becoming Willing to Ask for Help, because that was an enormous part of my recovery as a codependent, people pleaser, rescuer, fixer, savior person. That was just not an option for me. I was the helper. And when I started, even getting the idea to ask for help, I would feel like I was going to die at the thought of reaching out for help. It literally felt life-threatening to me. And slowly but surely, I learned how to do it. And now I'm like, oh my God, I love help. So go ahead and take it away. Share your experience, strength, and hope with people. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Barb. It's funny when you say about that feeling like you were going to die when asking for help. I could feel that in my heart. I've felt that same feeling so many times again and again. So that really came up for me. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be here. I always love talking to you. I love listening to your podcast. It's a real honor to be here. I'm very excited about it. And I have a feeling that some of your listeners will be able to resonate with my story.
I have no doubt.
Yeah, I think it's one that's common to us. There are some twists and plot turns, like most stories, but I think it's be able to resonate with a lot of people. So I'm going to kind of start toward the end of my recovery journey. I tell the beginning part of my story a lot, but I'm going to start where my addiction recovery started, because I think that was kind of the beginning of my journey into generational trauma recovery and my ACA story and all of those things. So in 2016, I was at the end of a second marriage, a relationship that, was good in the ways that it could be for where I was at my time in my life. but it wasn't really serving me, and it certainly wasn't serving my partner. She had kind of had enough and decided to move out. And it was at that time that I realized that things had to change. Yeah, I was in an executive position in cybersecurity at that time, high tech stuff, working for government. And I reasonably had everything. I had a good paying job. I had a good title. I had a nice house. I had a nice car. And yet I still was not happy. And I felt at that time, like I had since I was probably 8 years old, that I was fundamentally broken, that things were just wrong with me, and that there was really no solution to that. I was binge drinking at that time. I would binge drink at least 3 or 4 days a week, and just drink myself to sleep, basically. Drink until I couldn't stay awake anymore, and eventually I would go to bed. That was part of the reason why my then second wife left, just part of the greater issue. There were other things involved in as well. We were both repeating our family dysfunction. Neither of us knew that because neither of us had the tools to understand what we were doing. But, a lot of shame and mind reading and codependency and, all the things, manipulation, all the things that are involved in, dysfunctional relationship. We really didn't have an open line of communication. Neither of us really knew what we felt or thought. So much conditioning in that, and at the end of that relationship, I just realized something had to change. And I was working with a therapist at the time. The first time I had actually been in therapy, I was 46. And I was really seeing some benefit. Actually, my ex and I started going to therapy together in couple therapy. And quickly she decided that she didn't want to continue with it. I think we made it through 6 sessions. And I think when it started to get hard and there were expectations, she was kind of like, I'm out of here. And I just felt like there was something there. And I don't know that I really had gotten a lot of benefit yet, but I knew I felt like resourced. I felt like there was somebody there that was interested in what was going on in my life and trying to help. That idea that he was really genuinely trying to help meant an awful lot. So I stuck it out with that therapist and I got some real benefit. Partway into that process, I realized that I was having some obsessive thoughts, intrusive thoughts. And so I started meditating because I didn't want to use drugs. Oddly enough, I mean, I was using drugs already, However, I didn't want to use pharmaceutical drugs,
Medication.
A medication. Yeah. So I started meditating in a way to try to deal with those intrusive thoughts and try to lessen some of my obsessiveness. And in short order, I actually started to see benefits. I think it was like 2 weeks or so. The natural thought process of any good alcoholic might be, how can I use this to moderate my drinking? I didn't want to quit. I don't think anybody who likes to drink ever really wants to quit, but that's the way it goes. And so I actually started attending a mindfulness meditation group for people in recovery. The program's called Refuge Recovery. And at the time I was simply moderating. I was drying out. I went through this period where I was like, okay, I'm going to dry out. I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to smoke marijuana. I'm not going to play video games, and I'm not going to work to excess, because those were my big things. Drinking, working, and video games were real big problems for me. Ways I spent a lot of time and ways I avoided a lot of life. So I started going to this program and figuring that someday I'd figure out how to use it to moderate. And eventually I woke up one morning in my bed and was like, oh shit, this is what I need. I need recovery. I revolted against that. A couple days later, I finally woke up like 3 days later and was like, okay, I guess if this is what I got to do, I got to do. So I threw myself headlong into it, and I started a more local, a group in my hometown that was just 15 minutes away rather than 30. That really was a huge help to me, being able to actually be of assistance to others, to hold that space for others and build a group. And eventually that group grew to 6 meetings per week.
Wow.
Up until when COVID hit, and then we know what happened with COVID. So I attended the meetings. I got a lot out of it. I got a great chance to be of service. I learned a lot, but I was still struggling in a lot of ways. I didn't understand what my generational trauma and family dysfunction had done to me in the way of shame and just like these dysfunctional patterns, all the, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel things, and all the things that go along with that. In 2019, I decided that I was going to hike the Appalachian Trail. And I hadn't gone to treatment, to rehab, because at the time when I first got into recovery, well, I kind of backdoored my way into it, first of all. And I was already 3 months in before I decided that it was something I needed. And at that time, it felt weird to go to rehab, but I was seeing the benefits that friends of mine had from going to rehab. And so I decided I was going to hike the Appalachian Trail, and that was going to be my rehab. And so in 2020, I got a leave of absence from my work, and I went and hiked the AT. And of course, as you know, that was the year of COVID. There was a lot going on. There were very few people hiking. It was an odd year to hike the AT, but I got so much out of it. And one of the big things that I got out of it was a little bit of a dose of learning how it is to ask for help. When you're on trail hiking a big hike like that and you need to get to town might be 5 miles away or 10 miles away, and walking to town may be really inconvenient. You might have to ask for a hitchhike, or find some other means to get a ride into town. Or when you get to town, you might need some help with getting access to some supplies or whatever it is. And it really forced me into a position of needing to ask for help. I also got what they call a tramily, which is an abbreviation for trail family. And that was sort of this constant source of help. It was like subtle ways. There was often not having to just say, can you help me with this thing? But it was more discreet ways of like actually accepting help and being of assistance to one another, just being a support group. But there were so many opportunities there where I needed to ask for help. And it really opened my eyes to how frequently, especially in the middle of COVID, going to the grocery store to get groceries and realizing that the cashier was there not making a very good wage and putting her or himself in harm's way to help me. And I needed them to be there. If I go to the post office because my food is there, but I can't get in the door, I really need those people, those postal workers, to open the door and let me in and get my package and help me with that. And so it really changed the way that I look at like service industry work, how much I need their help. And it is help, very genuinely help. If they're not there, I can't get the service I need. So it really changed my perspective a lot on asking for help. Also during that hike, I had a lot of epiphanies. That was one of the big ones. But one of the other ones that I had along the way was realizing that the work that I was doing really wasn't serving me, and it wasn't going to be my future. It was serving me at the time to raise my kids, and it gave me the income I need to be able to do the things I do. And honestly, it allowed me a retirement. I was able to semi-retire at the age of 50. I still have to work, but I was able to do that. But it wasn't purposeful. There was no passion behind it. It was kind of interesting, had a sexy title. There was no passion, no purpose. And it wasn't going to be what I was going to do in the future. And what I did realize that was working outdoors, being outside on a regular basis was going to be a big part of my future. And that was where I really felt at home. It just changed my life in a lot of ways. So I came home from that experience and tried to reintegrate back into society. And things were different. The way I looked at life was a lot different. I realized how much less I need than previously, and just looking at life from a different lens. I started dating someone almost right away, and that someone happened to be an ACA. She and I actually had a really great relationship, but we only dated for about 5 weeks. However, she could feel my insecurities, and she could feel her own desire to try to fix those insecurities. After about 5 weeks, she ended the relationship. And, with the idea that she needed to take care of herself, and continue to heal on her own path. And I'm really glad she did. I'm glad that we had that relationship, because after having seen her, the way that she was able to talk with me directly, the way that she was able to have open, honest communication, the way that she was able to take care of herself, really made me want what she had, and there was just no two ways about it. Like, just to be able to see how, again, just a clear communication, to be able to say, hey, look, this is something that I see that's happening in our interactions, and this is the way it feels inside of me, and I want to hear how it is landing with you. That was a game changer. I had never had anybody ever be so direct and yet so kind at the same time, just genuine, authentic, kind, and direct. The day that she ended our relationship, I wept for the longest time, and it was so cathartic. I mean, I could tell in that moment that something was changing inside me and that things were going to be different. And so on December 8th of that year, 2020, I attended my first ACA meeting. and I knew immediately that I was home. It was just instantaneous. I went to a Zoom meeting in Palm Springs. If any of the listeners there listen to your podcast, they may. I know I've recommended this podcast to them. So if any of them are there, hey, nice to see you. That started my journey into ACA. The rewards of that program have been incredible. This December will be 4 years working the ACA program. And, the things that I've gotten from ACA have been pretty remarkable. When I just look at my ability to have those open, honest dialogues with people, it's just amazing to me how much more authentic I'm able to be now and to be able to express my emotions. A lot of these things are still a struggle. I know you share about that all the time, about how they're, still ongoing struggles. You don't put in 46 years of dysfunction or 50 years of dysfunction, like just training these patterns and turn it around overnight. It doesn't work like that, and I know that my path to recovery is long from over, but I have made so much progress already in the 3 years that I've been working ACA and in the 7 years that I've been working Buddhist-based recovery programs. I feel like a different person when I look back at who I was, how small I had become, and closed and fearful and angry, to being someone who feels good about themselves, and really sees his own value, is willing to just come do something like this. When I was in my recovery, I never could have, or when I was in my addiction, I never could have done something like come on a podcast like this. It would have been the exact trigger I would have needed to be up all night the night prior, binge drinking and feeling like shit in the middle of all of this, not being able to be here, being my authentic self. That's the bulk of my recovery story. I'd say some of the other things that have happened since I've been in recovery, the things that have really, like, I'd say the fruits of my recovery, starting this program. Actually, let me back up just a little bit. In 2021, I decided to retire from that position. And I went out west and hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. And I hiked about 800 miles of that before the trail got closed. And I had to call it quits on that. But bought a car and drove all around the West, scratched off most of my bucket list that summer and fall, which was pretty awesome. But I still noticed that there were times where I was disconnected, isolated, struggling with connecting with others. And that has continued to soften as I work through the program. And since starting the business, I found that there have been so many times where I need to ask somebody else for help. I can't do it all alone. It's quite simply. And there's really not a reason to do it all alone when there's help that's available. One of the examples of that, a friend of mine, her name is Ramona. She's an entrepreneur. She's runs a few businesses, and she had mentioned to me in talking to me about my business, you should check out the Small Business Administration SCORE program. I was not really familiar with it, but I checked it out. For those who don't know, SCORE is a service corps of retired executives, and they basically are business coaches. They do a great job. However, I just would not let myself connect with that program. And eventually, things were just not going well in my business. They were going nowhere. And I decided, okay, what else do I have to lose? But I was so fearful of letting this other person in, and so fearful of them knowing that I didn't know what I was doing. This like need to know what's going on and to have it all figured out. Well, obviously I wouldn't have it figured out, or I wouldn't go to a business coach if I had everything figured out.
Well, even when you have things figured out, it's still a good idea to go to a business coach, just FYI.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. So once I connected with my SCORE coach, mentor, things changed so much, from feeling like I was isolated and doing it alone, like I was making no progress, like I had no idea what I was doing, to having someone who was helping me see where I was making progress and helping me see where things were going well and helping me see where I needed to make some adjustments. And it was such a tremendous change in my business. I'm still meeting with my SCORE coach now. I have a new mentor since moving from Pennsylvania to North Carolina. And in fact, I met with him yesterday, and I just can't imagine not having that support. It's just not necessary to do any of this stuff alone.
You have said a lot of things that I would like to comment on, which is not always the case when I have guests. Often I just kind of let them talk. So I'm just going to kind of go down the list, and maybe we'll have a conversation or not. But one of the first words you used was, I felt resourced when you had the therapy. And I was like, oh my God, Like, I know what you mean, but I don't know that I've ever heard anybody say it like that. And it felt really good in my body to hear
Mm,
that. It felt like I was filled up, like what it feels like to be resourced as opposed to depleted. And I just love that. And then you talked about doing meditation to help with your intrusive thoughts. In the 12 steps, it really doesn't mention meditation until step 11, but you don't really need to wait to step 11 to do meditation. And I think, especially for ACAs, because our nervous system is such a mess that we
yeah,
don't understand that it's a lot of the reason it's a mess because A, we grew up in dysfunction and so we're in fight or flight mode, but B, it's the distorted thinking that is often causing the nervous system dysregulation, and that we actually have the power to regulate our own nervous systems. But I didn't even know that my nervous system was out of whack until I started having glimpses of it not being. And so I think, the power of meditation. Can you talk for a minute about refuge recovery and say what that is for people who are not familiar? I know some what about it, and I've known other people, but I think, some people have never heard about it. So if you could just take a couple minutes to say like what that is.
sure. Yeah, thanks for asking about that. Actually, there's an interesting distinction there. The program Refuge Recovery is a Buddhist-based recovery program. I think it was started in 2014 or 15, something like that. And there is another very similar program called Recovery Dharma. And I should say that Recovery Dharma is the program that I practice with currently. But I did
Okay.
start with Refuge Recovery. Refuge Recovery and Recovery Dharma are both based on 12 principles. Actually, there's a little bit more than 12 principles, but the highlights are these 12 principles. And they're basically the Four Noble Truths, which are a teaching by the Buddha that is really simple. Number one, in life, there is suffering. Number two, the cause of craving is suffering. Number three, there is an end to suffering. And number four, the path to suffering is the Eightfold Path. So really simple. There is craving. There is suffering. That suffering is caused by craving and aversion. There is an end to suffering and is the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is these 8 teachings about wise intention, wise effort, wise meditation, wise concentration, wise action, livelihood. And I think I'm missing one, but those teachings all, teach us how to engage in life. The program
Mm,
is a lot about mindfulness and meditation and understanding the reality of life based on allowing ourselves to become in touch with our inner self well enough to actually see what's happening, so that when aversion arises in us, we can kind of see what was the cause of that aversion, or why am I afraid of this feeling? Why am I afraid of this activity or event that I'm going to go to? It's really a lot about internal insight, and meditation can help us to be able to become calm enough and relaxed enough and resourced enough to be able to sit in the middle of that and feel the difficult feelings without running away from them. And there are a couple other concepts there that are really important. The Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, which are the Buddha is not only the Buddha as he was the teacher of these principles, not a prophet, but just a teacher, but also the Buddha nature. The Buddha that we know of as the Buddha is not the first Buddha, and he will not be the last Buddha, but that Buddha nature, that like innate goodness inside of each of us is a core principle of it. And then Dharma is those teachings, the whole set of teachings and knowledge that goes behind it and the practices. And then the Sangha is the group of people that you practice with. So, it's myself, it's the teachings, it's the community all together. We need all of those things for it to work well. And going back to this idea of like needing help, just being in the room meditating with other people is such a tremendous difference and such
mm,
a great, powerful opportunity compared to sitting in meditation alone.
yeah.
So yeah, there's some more stuff there. That's the big stuff, the highlights of both of those programs.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. And both programs have meetings all across the country.
Awesome. I love it. When you talked about being in the room meditating with multiple people at the same time, I sort of felt that in my body too. And I'm like, I need to check out one of those meetings locally. You also talked about being on the trail and it becoming incredibly important for you to be able to ask for help. I think I went on a 6-week solo road trip in a camper van out
Yes, I
west.
do know.
And I mean, first of all, I think it's impossible to take a solo road trip, but solo trip anywhere without asking for help because you don't know everything and you don't have everything. But for me, because my van broke down so many times, I had to ask for help. And then I'd never done anything like that before. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. And so I was in recovery for 3.5 years or something like that. So I had gotten much better about asking for help, but I wasn't like really good at it. I think by the time I got back from my trip, I was like really good at asking for help and not just asking, but receiving and not feeling like shit about it.
Right.
One of the things it's done for me, I've always been someone who is a pretty obviously helpful person, I'm recovered codependent, but I feel like an obligation to help strangers in need because of I'm like getting teary because of so many kind souls, most of whom I never even knew their name. Like what just popped into my mind was the second vehicle that I had, I was getting gas and some alarm went off and it was really, really loud and disturbing. And I had no fucking idea how to turn it off. And this woman came over, reached her hand in the car and like turned off the key or something. I don't know, something. And didn't even say anything to me. And I was like, so much because I was frazzled.
Right.
It was just the whole situation.
I can say that when I was on the Pacific Crest Trail, the opportunities to ask for help were even greater than on the East Coast because in the West, everything's so much more spread out. And so asking for help was an absolute necessity. I had kind of primed that skill when I was on the Appalachian Trail, but when I was out West, I couldn't get around it. It can be an hour from one town to the next by drive. You're not going to walk it, so it really became a skill that I made good use of.
Yeah. And it saves your life, like literally. And then also just in everyday life. And like, we're both living proof that you can have like a decades long life of never asking for help, feeling like you're going to die when you learn that asking for help is a thing, feeling like you're going to die just from thinking about it. And then now we're both really good at asking for help. So
absolutely,
that's you, like we're living proof. When you talked about how much you appreciate the service industry based on your hike, I got teary-eyed just thinking about that like remembering like people in the fucking grocery store that don't get paid shit are essential workers and people often treat them like shit. And like how much our lives are dependent on people in the service industry, most of whom do not get paid living wages and put up with unbelievable behavior from other people. And so I just loved hearing how much you have come to appreciate them and like realize like we're receiving help all the time, all over the place in society, and that being really mindful of that and accepting that. And then when you talked about the woman that you dated for 5 weeks and you said, I wanted what she had, that to me is the epitome of carrying the message. I remember when my sponsor first said to me, you don't just carry the message, you are the message, which I know was a line from, I think it's from the 12 and 12, not the AA 12 and 12, not the AA Big Book, but I could be wrong. At first, this was my OA, my Overeaters Anonymous sponsor. And so I was down an enormous amount of weight by then. So people just looking at me could see there was something different about me. And that's what I thought she meant, was they could see the visual.
Right.
But the reality is that may be so, but it's more this like ability to be honest with someone, to be kind and clear and open and directly communicate with them without being a dick about it. And like welcoming the response and stuff like that and being like, oh my God, that's a thing. Like people can communicate like that. I remember for me, this may sound a little funny and crazy, but when I started watching the Hallmark Channel and I saw people breaking up all the time in those movies, but they weren't cursing each other. They weren't stalking each other. They weren't keying their cars and throwing things through their windows and screaming and yelling and slamming doors. They were saying things like, this isn't what I really want, but I really, wish you all the best. I was like, people talk like that? And at first it was like, okay, well, this is the Hallmark Channel. But then I'm like, a human being wrote that dialogue. So it had to come from somewhere. And then realizing like, oh my God, like people actually talk like this and they share what's going on with them. They don't try to hide and pretend that they're not feeling something. So I absolutely totally identify with that. I also loved that you used the phrase, I don't remember now what it was you were talking about, but something continued to soften. Like, I think that's so much of recovery, that there's so many aspects of our, maybe the self-deprecation begins to soften. The rigidity with which we approach life begins to soften and continues to soften. And I just loved that language. That was just so beautiful. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Well, I can tell you what came up in me in just hearing you kind of repeat that back to me was the idea of willingness, which I think is, the beginning of the softening. There's so much that we need to do in recovery. I say I have my path, you have your path. Each of us has our individual things that we need to work on. But, the things that I need to work on, I need to first become willing to do. And that whole idea of willingness, I think in so many cases has been the sort of gateway into healing. The idea that I don't need to be finished with this thing right now. I just need to be willing to consider it and just willing to look at it. And that's, a lot of the 12-step work. It's a lot of mindfulness and meditation is just a willingness to be present with the thing that comes up. And once we're willing to be with it and see that there's this suffering behind it all, I think there's nothing that can happen but some natural softening. This compassion that comes in when we see the places in which we are hurt, or the places in which those who taught us, who conditioned us, are hurt. These things all come from someone suffering. And when you can see it at that level, there's almost no way for a person to respond but to bring in compassion and softening.
Yeah, I love compassion. I think, what I see, especially in my clients, is they have lots of compassion for others, but none for themselves, or damn close to none.
Yeah.
I think that's so important. And, willingness, when I start with a new sponsee, I'm like, they say HOW, honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. I can't help you if you're not honest. You have to be open-minded to the idea that there's something you don't know and haven't tried, and willing to be honest and open-minded and willing to try new things. And to me, willingness is the most important. And I think if you have willingness and a higher power, nothing can stop you. And I think the same thing when it comes to people becoming sponsors. I know in the ACA, many people are very afraid of becoming sponsors because they don't want to become an authority figure. They don't want to take on people's problems. And I say the same thing to them. Are you willing to be a sponsor? Do you have a higher power? Well, just like you can use a higher power and willingness to recover, you can use a higher power and willingness to sponsor people if that's your path. I also want to go back to, you mentioned SCORE, which is an arm of the Small Business Administration. It stands for Service Corps of Retired Executives. They're no longer made up of retired executives. Some of them are, but many of them are still practicing entrepreneurs and executives. And one thing you didn't mention is that it's free. And that's because it's paid for through the Small Business Administration, and most of them are volunteers. And I too, one of the first things I did was I Googled entrepreneurship and business and stuff. And I went to a half-day workshop by SCORE. I've worked with a couple of SCORE mentors over time, but I've always thought, once I got into the world of entrepreneurship, that I feel there's a lot of overlap between entrepreneurship and recovery. For one thing, we fall down 7 times and get up 8. You're not going to make it if you cannot get back up again. So resilience is really important. That we're all trying to be better in some way in our lives, and personal development. And to me, other than recovery, there is no personal development program as stringent as being an entrepreneur. When I first started my business, I thought that who I wanted to coach was people in recovery who were entrepreneurs. And I just sort of I tried to do a meetup group, and it didn't really work. And what I found was people entrepreneurs didn't want people necessarily to know that they were in recovery. But what just occurred to me while you were talking is that I want to consider, and maybe anybody who's interested that's listening, I want to consider maybe hosting a monthly 12-step or recovery meeting for people that are entrepreneurs, just once a month on Zoom. I've actually personally, as a boundaries coach, coached a number of people who are entrepreneurs. And there's so much juice there because there's so many opportunities to apply our recovery because we're challenged damn close to every single day. I've had a number of coaches since I've become an entrepreneur, and all of them have been something like 50% mindset and 50% strategy. And I feel like sometimes it's more like 60% mindset, because if you don't have the right mindset, you're not going to implement the strategy and you're going to sabotage yourself and you're not going to follow through and
Right.
blah, 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 and all that stuff. So, I really want to think about that. So if you're listening to this and you have any interest at all in being in once a month Zoom meeting for recovery for entrepreneurs, send me an email, barb@higherpowercc.com, or tag me on Instagram. I'm at Higher Power Coaching. This has been fantastic, Ken. I felt like on the verge of tears a number of times by what you were saying, very moved by the things you were saying. So I do want to give you an opportunity to tell people what your business is that you do and how
Awesome.
they can find you. I will put all of your contact information and stuff in the show notes as well. But I want you to, just for those who are not, some people tell me like, I don't even know what show notes are, Barb. So, what do you do? And then how can they find you?
Thanks, Barb. I really appreciate that opportunity. I am a recovery coach. I work with people in recovery from addiction. That's my primary focus. And my business is actually kind of multifaceted. Everything that I do is experiential work. So my peer one-on-one recovery coaching is based around doing some kind of outdoor activity or an activity of some sort. We might go to the climbing gym or something like that, but it's activity based. I think there's a lot of benefit in getting moving and doing something together in that way. So I have a group recovery coaching program. I also work with treatment centers and other community organizations doing group facilitation. I do some outdoor stuff and mostly outdoor stuff, but some indoor stuff as well. I do group drumming, which is a really popular activity. I also do mindfulness and meditation, which is another indoor program. And then the third big portion of that program is backpacking trips. So I do recovery backpacking trips. We do 2.5 to like 14-day backpacking trips. And It's all people in recovery. It's all recovery focused. There are a lot of facilitated activities. There are a lot of tools that are learned along the way. It's a great chance to connect with nature and challenge yourself and be outdoors and disconnect and get to know yourself better, build a recovery community. It's really a great opportunity. And then I'm also a meditation teacher. I teach meditation at a number of places. Currently offering a couple online, or I'm currently in the middle of offering one online meditation program, and I'm doing some retreats locally. I hope to be doing more retreats, combination of meditation and outdoor retreats in the coming year. It's something a regular offering that I want to add for people in recovery. So yeah, and you can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on my website. And I think that covers most of the stuff.
What's your website and what's your handle on Instagram and Facebook?
My Instagram handle is Expedition Recovery, all smashed together. Facebook is EXPEDREC, I think. I actually don't use Facebook as much. I use Instagram more so than Facebook. And I'm not going to torture you with my email address. You can just put it in the show notes. Or
Okay.
Not my email address, but my website, because it's kind of goofy. Yeah.
But if people Google Ken Dunn Expedition Recovery, are they likely to find you?
They will definitely find me. Yeah, people. Okay. You can also find me on LinkedIn. You can find me all the places.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And again, if you are an entrepreneur in recovery and have any interest at all in attending a monthly Zoom meeting, I'm not making any promises, but the idea came up in my head and it seems like a good one. All right. Thank you so much, Ken.
Thank you.
It costs the average professional woman $20,500 per year to keep saying yes when she really wants to say no and neglecting herself because she's so focused on others. Here's how I know. I went to AI for help and it told me to include time spent on unwanted tasks, opportunity costs, and the cost to their health and well-being in figuring this out. So here are the numbers it gave me. Time spent on unwanted tasks was assumed to be 5 hours per week, and the average professional women's salary is $103,000 per year. So that's a total of $12,500 per year. Opportunity costs are what these women potentially miss in career advancement, skill development, bonuses, etc. That's assumed at $5,000. Health and well-being includes increased medical expenses of $1,000 due to stress and self-neglect, and $2,000 due to decreased productivity because of burnout. So, if you want an extra $20,500 per year, you've got to stop saying yes and neglecting yourself. So if that's you or the women in your organization, please contact me, barb@higherpowercc.com, for either private coaching, trainings, or keynote speeches. If you like this podcast, and I'm guessing you did or you wouldn't still be listening, then you're gonna love the other things I have to offer. If you'd love pre-release podcast scripts and episodes before anyone else gets them, or if you'd love access to content from my private vault that I developed exclusively for my private clients, which is like having a work session with me without me actually being there, go to patreon.com/higherpowercoaching. There are 3 tiers ranging from as low as $4 up to $24 a month. You'll also love my weekly newsletter, Friday Fragments, which has content very similar to the podcast. You can check it out at fridayfragments.news. That's fridayfragments.news. Please like and subscribe to my podcast on your favorite podcast outlet. I'd also love it if you'd leave a review, which you can do either in the show notes or on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other people find my podcast so they can get the benefits you've gotten from listening. If someone came to mind when you listened to this particular episode, please share it with them. And my favorite place to hang out on social media is Instagram. I'm at Higher Power Coaching. Please DM me there. I'd love to hear what you got from this episode. I run group and private coaching programs on building healthy boundaries. Whether you need help with boundaries in your personal, professional, or romantic life, I can help. Head on over to barbchat.net, where you can hop onto my calendar for a free 30-minute Better Boundaries consultation. My ideal client is someone who is ripe for change. If that's you, I would love to work with you. My goal with all my work is to help you make lasting changes in your life like I've made deep, lasting changes in my life. Remember, it's never too late to recover. No one is beyond hope, and healing is possible. Thanks for listening.